winners of the Cornelia Futor Memorial Student Grant Paper. And for those of you who don't know and did not know Cornelia, she was one of the founders of Timesifters, and she was one of the prime movers and shakers of this club for, I don't know, 25, 30 years. She was incredibly dedicated to Timesifters, but also really dedicated to public outreach, and she was passionate. She was not a professional archaeologist, but she was passionate about archaeology and passionate about sharing that with members of the public. And she would always be a friendly face out at our outreach events. And so when we decided to start holding this grant contest, one of the prime motivators of that was to give college students the opportunity to share their work with the public, to get the experience of not only writing a paper for class, but actually being able to present that for members of the public that are not professional archaeologists. So this is why the grant is named after Cornelia and why it is so special to us. So we're going to have two presentations tonight. Both talks will go for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have 5 to 10 minutes of questions after each one. So we're going to start with our runner-up. Now, Rebekah Nault is a junior at the University of South Florida. She's also a mom, that's very important, and a custom picture framer by trade. But right now she's studying for archaeology. She said in her bio that she had always been passionate about anthropology. And when her son, who is in the audience today, became old enough to ask her why she hadn't finished school, she decided to take that as a cue that she should start again. So her paper is titled The Hobbit, Homo Floresiensis, she might be able to pronounce that better than I do, which is on the Indonesian island of Flores. And I would like to introduce Rebekah.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, I'm already doing it wrong.
Oh.
Or,
wait, no.
okay.
That's my mistake. Hold on, I gotta switch
All right.
to your presentation.
Okay, no problem. It's been about 10 years since I've given a presentation, so I am so sorry about how nervous I am. And that I'm likely to mispronounce things. Again, I apologize. I practiced last night, but we'll see how it goes. Okay. All right, so the Hobbit, Homo Floresiensis. I wanted to start with this quote. There is nothing like looking if you want to find something. You certainly usually find something if you look, but it is not always quite the something you are after. It was appropriate because Tolkien obviously wrote The Hobbit, and it describes how Homo Floresiensis was found. The scientists who discovered it were indeed looking for something else. All right. The discovery team was looking for evidence of migration of ancient people between Asia and Australia in an area known as the Wallace Line, which is the first one here. The Wallace Line was first described in 1858 by a contemporary of Darwin, Alfred Russel Wallace. What's so cool about the Wallace Line is that it clearly separates the fauna. To the west of the line are the Asiatic species, and to the east of the line is a mixture of Asiatic and Australian species. As you can see on the slide, the Wallace Line runs through Indonesia and the island of Flores, which is where the Hobbit was found. It lies to the east of it, it's in there. Although there are several archaeological sites on Flores, for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to focus on Liang Bua Cave, which I have here. All right. Liang Bua is a 50-meter-long, single-interest limestone cave first discovered in the 1950s. It has a very high ceiling, year-round sunlight, and natural water and stone sources. It's not surprising that it's provided shelter for a variety of species for several millennia. It has yielded vast amounts of fossils and artifacts that date to both the Pleistocene and the Holocene. In the 1950s, Dutch priest and archaeologist Father Theodore Verhoeven did extensive archaeological work all around the Wallace Line, and into Liangboa Cave, but he did not publish his work. He did, however, remain in contact with other archaeologists who continued it. There's even an extinct species of giant tree rat found on Flores, named after him. It's excuse me, I'm going to massacre this. Pagamasdiodora verhuveni. Let's say that that's exactly how you say it. All right, and then here's a shot of the cave. But before we dive into the discovery of the fossils, it's important to recognize that despite the fact that this find was made less than 15 years ago, the documentation, or at least what's been made available to the public, is incredibly limited and kind of surprisingly sketchy. As a current student of archaeology, it is very frustrating for me because everything should obviously, we all know, be properly and meticulously documented. However, the actual find location within the cave through at least 3 successive papers has shifted. The actual location of Homo Floresiensis, the LB1, subject LB1, it has been moved around in different papers. So we're not exactly sure where exactly that she was found. As a student, I find this infuriating because I feel I would, if I found something at field work and was like, oh, I found it around here-ish, that I would, be asked to leave, which would be right. Okay, slide 4. All right. Indonesian archaeologists have been recovering the Neolithic human remains in Liangboa for decades. So when the first hint of a skull appeared, they were like, oh, excellent, but they assumed it was a 3-year-old child. But closer inspection showed that it was something much more extraordinary. It revealed distinct wear patterns on the teeth, erupted third molars, and mature limb bones. And the pelvis appeared female, and although tiny, only about 3 feet tall, it was a fully grown adult. This was what has been known as the Hobbit. I will also refer to her as LB1 and Homo Floresiensis. In addition to LB1, the bones from as few as 4, but as up to 14 individuals have also been found. The other, LB6 is another one I'll mention a lot. It is a mandible but no skull. LB1 is the only subject that actually they found a skull with, which is going to lead to all sorts of problems later on. I've listed all the rest of the recovered fossils here, most of them frustratingly, like I said, frustratingly tiny. And there's between 4 and 14 individuals. We definitely need more, and we need more skulls. Let me see the next. Okay, yes. LB1 was originally dated to 17,000 to 18,000 years before present day, but after the volcanic material it was found in was reevaluated in 2016, they pushed the date to between 60 and 70,000 years before present day, making LB1 and the other fossils much older than first thought. LB1's skull is about 1/3 the size of an average human's. You can see here for the comparison. It is the smallest brain size in all of human evolution so far. It's much closer to the size of a chimpanzee brain than it is to our own. You can also see the photo of LB1 when it was still encased in sediment. The discovery team has been criticized because the excavation in the cave was very difficult. It's very difficult. It's been extremely difficult to excavate there because of the natural water sources. So when they first discovered her, she was very pliable, and they couldn't even remove her this much until 3 days after discovery and after applying a hardener. Let's see, I'm so sorry. So the critics, the skull itself, this picture isn't the best here, but it's extremely asymmetrical on the right side. The right side is 14% bigger than the left side, and some have said that this is because when they first discovered him, it was so pliable that the discoverers themselves had actually impacted the shape of the skull. Also, it's lacking sutures in it, which they also claim we cannot determine whether or not that was naturally there or if it is indeed because of how soft it was when it was found. All right, now, our little Homo Floresiensis was probably a tool user. The tools found around LB1 in all of Southeast Asia are very similar to the African Oldowan tools from Homo erectus to Homo sapiens and unchanged for about 800,000 years. In the same level of Liang Bois that LB1 was found, there are also 5,500 artifacts per cubic meter, including points, blades, and perforators. Despite its small brain size, some archaeologists speculate that Homo floresiensis could have developed tool use because they were trapped on an island with less predators, theoretically giving them the opportunity of more free time, and so leading to the production and use of tools. However, other archaeologists insist that LB1's wrist bones were incapable of tool manufacture and use because the limbs of Homo floresiensis are much more ape-like than they are Homo sapien. It's also been theorized that Homo floresiensis watched Homo sapiens making and using tools and they emulated them. In addition, it's also been theorized that the Homo sapiens were actually hunting Homo floresiensis, and that explains why they were found with so many tools. As you can see, researching this was intense. It's a lot of different theories. But what else was found with Homo floresiensis? Many strange bedfellows. Aside from the mixture of animals themselves, the strangest thing about them is their unusual sizes. They were members of an isolated island community, and because they were trapped on an island, the process of evolution began to select for optimal survivability, shrinking or enlarging species as needed. However, you should be wary of such broad generalizations, because while it is true for some, it is not true for all species. For example, they're now speculating that the giant Komodo dragon found here, the largest fossil found in Liang Bois, was actually the original Komodo dragon. Like, it did not evolve to that because of the island rule. But in addition to Komodo dragons, Homo floresiensis shared Flores with macaques, porcupines, owls, pigs, small deer, and cat-like creatures, tortoises, 4 different kinds of giant rat, including Mr. Vanderhoeven's, miniature elephants, and a giant carnivorous marabou stork. The 47 individual stegodons found within the cave were juvenile, and it's believed that if the hobbits were indeed hunting them, then of course they would be hunting the juveniles, because they are much, much smaller, much easier for a hobbit to hunt. But the full-grown stegodon only reached about 4 feet tall. And I wish they were still around, because it would be fantastic to have an elephant as a pet. That would be great. But now let's take a minute to consider something that really terrifies me, which is the giant carnivorous marabou stork. If you've ever gazed into the eyes of a large bird like a crane or even an ostrich, and they're so black and deep and void of warmth and like the embodiment of the world, like of primal, just imagine, confronting one that is twice your size and man-hungry. So the first bird skeleton recovered at Liang Bois was the marabou stork. Okay. This is where the story gets a little reality TV. There's a lot of academic bickering. Dr. Jacob, which is spelled Jacob, but I looked it up, and the proper Indonesian pronunciation, I hope, is Jacob, is head of Indonesia's Paleoanthropology Institute, and he had a reputation for being very selective about who he allowed access to and study of any specimens that were in his possession, getting very possessive of them. So it was particularly alarming to the discovery team when he borrowed, without asking, allegedly, the skull and mandible of LB1, a pelvis, and an as of yet unpublished jawbone. he had alleged to have slipped them into his suitcase and walked away, which they've illustrated for you here. This is actually from an article in Nature, I think, that did an entire kind of comic book spread on the story. It wasn't until, so Mike Morwood was the head of the discovery team, and he was furious. It wasn't until Dr. Jacob found himself under the scrutiny of the press that he publicly promised to return the fossils, which he eventually did. But Dr. Morwood and his team claimed that the fossils had been severely damaged while in Dr. Jacob's attempt at mold making. And it wasn't until February 20 of 2005 that everything was returned, although damaged. Let's see the next one. All right. And here, I just love this picture because Mike Morwood is really looking at Dr. Jacob like he could hit him upside the head. As you can see on this slide, the left side of the pelvis was completely smashed. And the skull and jawbone both suffered anatomic detail loss because of the mold-making process. And the jawbone had appeared to have been broken in half during the mold-making process and then poorly repaired. Now, Dr. Jacob claims that he took the fossils because his lab was the only one set up for proper paleoanthropological analysis. And two outside professionals claimed that they had viewed the specimens in January and had observed no damage. So Dr. Jacob also admitted to rebuilding the jawbone, but claimed it was only because it hadn't been done yet, which we have no idea, it was unpublished. In a final retaliatory insult, Dr. Jacob accused the original team of being careless with the fossils during transport, saying they used a suitcase. I do not use this to transport fossils. We use special bags to carry bones. And I'm kind of new to this, so I'm not really sure. Is insinuating that other archaeologists transport bones in suitcases a typical archaeologist insult, or was it just for this case? It's like very strange. All right, let's see. So now to the theories, which are also lots of conflict here. I like that, again, from the same article, and they're clearly about to fight. Dr. Jacob was a proponent of microcephaly as a pathological explanation for Homo Floresiensis. He made these statements before examining the bones, which we shouldn't do, but he did. He was just very firm. And he claimed that the skull was actually, after he had studied it, within the range of Australian Aboriginal skulls. So he believed absolutely it was pathological. Professor Robert Martin, a specialist in relative growth, reported that the skull of LB1 would fit inside the skull of a modern human with microcephaly. He also declared that LB1 could not be a dwarf descendant of Homo erectus because LB1's brain was much too small. Initially, Dr. Morwood himself was a proponent of the dwarfed Homo erectus, but eventually agreed with Dr. Martin and concluded that it was much more likely for Homo floresiensis to have been a dwarfed Homo habilis. And so the other pathological theories, as you can see, include Down syndrome, Laron syndrome, and congenital hypothyroidism. The biggest challenge for such pathological explanations is that since the original find, more Homo floresiensis fossils have been recovered around Flores, and they all appear to share these same Hobbit characteristics that we're seeing over and over again. So it has kind of shifted the speculation away from pathological and more toward the theories of like insular dwarfism. Okay, and here's what. The theory that proves most popular with TV audiences is that of the Abu Gogo. Indonesian folklore describes tiny humans with big feet and bigger appetites that live in caves on the outskirts of the island. Abu Gogo translates to the grandmother who eats everything. They were notorious for taking anything they wanted, and things escalated one night when they allegedly took a newborn baby, which was later found deceased. This ended the villagers' relationship with the Abu Gogo, and they vowed to banish them forever. So, which is interesting, it's fantastic. I was so excited when I discovered this folklore. But in a deeply irresponsible and lame move, Animal Planet aired a terrible mockumentary featuring cannibalistic Abu Gogo. Because Animal Planet never expressly declared it fake, many viewers believed it and still believe it to be true. In this horrible mockumentary, one of the discoverers is actually eaten by an abu-gogo. This is Animal Planet. Oh. So, like I said, the folklore was one of the last things I encountered while researching, because I was focused on the archaeology. And initially I was so excited, because if there's folklore and it syncs with the archaeological record, then that tells us that there's a really good chance that Homo floresiensis and Homo sapiens were interacting on some level with one another, which is what is truly remarkable. And I feel that this whole cannibal thing completely, what would have interested would-be archaeologists and kids and everyone just was completely put off by this whole cannibal thing. Yeah, it cast an entire shadow over folklore. Okay, so here are a couple of the fun facts. So when Father Theodore Verhoeven first visited Liang Bois Cave in the 1950s, it was being used as an elementary school, which sounds like the coolest elementary school ever. How lucky it must have been to get to go to school there. And Mike Morwood, throughout all of the interviews and everything I read about him, he's since passed on, but he seemed to have a really funny sense of humor, very lighthearted man. And he really enjoyed messing with the less lighthearted, unamused paleoanthropologist Peter Brown. And when he suggested to name LB1 Homo Hobbitus, Peter didn't appreciate it, but I did. I think it's hilarious. And there are Tolkien's hobbits and Homo floresiensis both have big floppy feet, a short stature, and theorized giant appetites. I even went into a side bin here, and I didn't get any luck with the research, wondering if Tolkien had somehow himself heard of the abu-gogo folklore, because he was a very thorough man and incorporated it, which I feel like is something he could do, but I can't say that I found that to be true. And in addition to, they're speculating about their large appetites, the teeth of LB1 and LB6 do seem to indicate, at the very least, that they consumed an unusual amount of fibrous something. Their teeth are very weird. The wear patterns, you know how normally wear patterns you wear all on the same level. In LB1 and LB6 wear patterns, the teeth are plainly worn down, but on dramatically varying levels from tooth to tooth. And so we have no real explanation for that. And one more thing about the teeth. LB1 and LB6 and the modern people of Flores all share a trait not seen anywhere else. They all have twisted premolars, which is interesting, just very interesting. And so the original name given to Homo floresiensis was Pseudanthropus floresianus, which translates to man from the Sundo region of Flores. But it was then determined to be a member of Homo, so it should be Homo floresianus. But when it was pointed out that it translated to flowery anus, they settled on Homo floresiensis. And I couldn't help making the graphic. Wait, is this the... Oh, here are a couple artist interpretations. Obviously, that's Beef Squatch from Bob's Burgers. I was being funny. And this guy, I don't know if you'd recognize him. I'm surprised Animal Planet did not model their little cannibal off of him. He's from the 1970s Trilogy of Terror, horrible made-for-TV movie that emotionally scarred me as a child. And so the conclusions, yep, they found many new ones, but not yet a skull, which is what we need so desperately to get any kind of better read about it. I think with all the infighting, because it's very vague, you know how papers are, I think it was a mixture of cultural differences and nationalism and ego. You did have competing, you had Indonesia, Australia, America, all very interested in this find. I think Dr. Jakob felt that he had the most rights to it, which, I mean, geologically he did. Yeah, I really hope, like, I would love to find a link that the Ibu Gogo and Homo Floresiensis are indeed related to one another. And one last thing, we have no idea when the first hominins appeared on the island of Flores, which is significantly frustrating in trying to put together the record. But, so that is it. Are there any questions? Thank you. Yes?
Did you find, or did anybody find the tools that they might have made? Like, would they be little teeny tiny points?
It didn't mention, actually, that's a very good question. In the literature, all the tools looked exactly like everything else found throughout Southeast Asia, even in size. And in Liang Bua Cave, too, there is it was a great evidence that there was definitely tool manufacture occurring there at some point. We just don't know who was doing it, if it were Homo Floresiensis or Homo sapiens or Homo habilis. We have no idea yet. Yes?
Have they found any other sites on the island?
There are several sites on the island, and archaeology is still ongoing actively. Malta Manga, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but that is where they found another Homo Floresiensis skeleton, which is in the Soa Basin, which is not very far at all from Liang Bua Cave. Yes, sir?
You mentioned the flexibility of the skull when they found it.
Mm-hmm.
Has anybody come across any situation or chemical, or for what reason was it, and have the skulls have hardened after that?
It's because it was in a very like muddy, water-dense breccia. I couldn't find anywhere, again, I'm not sure if it was because of like intellectual property concerns but the specific process that they did, all I can find is that they had to wait 3 days and they applied a mysterious hardener to make the skulls firm up. But that's it. I have no idea otherwise. What, Ben?
Was there any male skeletons?
None have been definitively identified yet because there haven't been any more pelvises as far as I'm aware. But there would have to be. You could say that we would expect to find them. Anything else?
Very good.
Thank you. Thank you so much.